Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, students, this is lecture number 13 on literary forms and movements, and the topic of today's discussion is colonialism and post-colonialism. Students, this is very much important topic because it relates to your contemporary studies, and I hope in your MPhil and MS and in your PhD studies you may discuss the colonial and post-colonial discussion. Students, in today's lecture we are going to discuss the general overview of colonialism and post-colonialism, introduction to the study, transforming events and resistance, revealing the economic and cultural aspect of colonialism and post-colonialism, typologies of colonialism, the value of ethnography, and colonialism and post-colonialism today. Students, the giant composite field of colonialism and post-colonialism studies has had a transforming effect on modern anthropology. Anthropologists have been innovative users of its multidisciplinary perspective and key contributors to its challenging account of past and contemporary global life and experience. The call to prioritize colonial and post-colonial perspective in the forming of anthropology's central research questions has greatly extended the field's range and scope, including its distinctive approaches to the issue of whether it is colonialism that should be seen as modernity's most important progenitor and the source of its most toxic forms of subjugation and disempowerment. Students, this entry notes the sophistication with which anthropology has both embraced and challenged the forms of cultural and social analysis through which the epistemic and material transformation of global empire and its afterlife have been documented and theorized. Students, and it argues that studies of colonialism and post-colonialism still have a strong and productive future in a world now widely thought to require the multi-dimensional framing provided by today's high-profile theorists of globalization and cosmopolitanism. Students, the giant composite field of colonialism and post-colonialism studies has had a transforming effect on virtually every academic field in the humanities and social sciences. Students, anthropologists have been particularly innovative users of its multidisciplinary perspective and have responded with vigor and creativity when accused by practitioners of its deconstructive critique of being handmaidens of colonial power and heirs to the subjugating knowledge strategies that underpinned imperial rule. Students, there have been major changes in anthropology's aims and claims arising from theorists' insistence that the enduring forms of subjugation and epistemic violence engendered by the modern empires must be recognized as distinctive pathologies of the contemporary world. Students, the call to priorities colonial and post-colonial perspectives informing virtually all analytic accounts and research questions have greatly extended anthropology's range and scope. It has led to the use of tools from both within and beyond the discipline, including post-structuralist understandings of power and subjectivity and the contingency of open-endedness of historical change. Students, these perspectives have fed debate on a wide range of topics: anti-colonial nationalism, religious conversions, capitalist market transformations, gender relations and domestic intimacies, urban experiences and historicity, citizenship and migration, as well as resistance and hegemonic power effects. Students, colonialism became a major scholarly concern in the late 1970s, while post-colonialism came to prominence in the 1980s. Both singly and together, their embrace signaled on attack on perspectives deemed outmoded and inadequate for an understanding of the global and order. Students, a particular target for such challenges has been the concept of imperialism, formerly the dominant idiom in Marxist and related world systems account of the global expansion of capitalist in modernity. Students, in his study of imperialism, scholars' key concerns were with motivations and actions initiated from colonizers, metapoles, economic logic of empires, how they were structured and expanded, the treatment of what would have be characterized as experience within the colonized world related largely to the structural transformations in the material sphere. The most notable of these were massive social and environmental changes wrought by novel land control systems, including coercive cash cropping schemes and the widespread destruction of forests and grasslands, and the forcible creation of new production and labor systems to meet the commodifying needs of Western capitalist economies. Students, with anthropologists turned to globally formed historical perspective in the 1980s, the implications of empire and world system theory were addressed by some of the discipline's leading innovators. Students, Toxic study of the economic of empire in Bolivia focused on Rindian in Miner's narratives of the devil as presiding agent of the commoditization of their labor under Spanish rule, and in Sahlin's celebrated account of the death of English explorer navigator James Cook at the hand of Hawaiians in 1779, the killing was transformative event, interpretable through the concept of mythopraxis. Students, in the islanders' perspective on occurrences taking place in mythic rather than linear time, student Sahlins claimed that this was not an account of fixed cultural forming counterpoised to an equally static Western trade and empire worldview. Instead, mythopraxis allowed for relation of dialectical conjecture between two dynamic historicities, thus a forging of something new in the context of the early moment of imperial fatal impact. Students, though much contested, such studies created provocative links between anthropologists concerned with economic and cultural, as in Comoros' treatment of the Southern African Zion Church faith as symbolic bricolage, expression of cultural resistance to the forced investigation of adherence into the alienating structure of capitalist commodities production. Students, in other studies too, resistance to control power is discerned not so much in confrontation or counter-hegemonic hidden transcripts. But in poetics, that is the expression, that is the expressiveness and play of the creative mind, as in the imagining of alternative spiritual realities in millenarian cargo cults. Students' related works on colonial context have discerned historicity in the form of intention or co-fabrication in what had previously been seen as timeless ethnographic givens, including tribe in Africa and caste and ethno-religious community in India. Student, this raised the continuous question of whether even grossly disadvantaged subjects were active or agents in the making of their new epistemic and material realities, rather than mere recipients of whatever the colonizer constructed and imposed. Students debates about how to relate the economic and cultural in colonial contexts has been further nourished by anthropologists' study of the creation of new economics through the mass recruitment of enslaved or indentured labor. In another of Kelly's work dealing with plantation-based sugar production in Fiji, concepts one thought of as universal in economic anthropology are found to be the subjects of highly divergent moral narratives about trade, value, and production. Students, these were not just a matter of disparities in the thinking of whites as opposed to non-whites, or even opposition in the thinking of the island's massive influx of Indian indentured laborers as compared to native Fijians. What is striking in his account is that it was the two key groups of Indian incomers, field workers and trader shopkeepers, who were sharply divided in their ideas about the morality of trade, value, and labor. Students, moreover, Kelly finds a way to account for this which productively rethinks an elasticity both the Marxist legacy as deployed in colonial political economy studies, and the theories of culture which have been embraced as their alternative. Students, but what has become a very deep scholarly dividing line in the point at which anthropologists have turned their skills of ethnographic specificity to the forging of typologies distinguishes, as many historians have done, between the effects of different varieties of imperial rule and power. Students, a revealing case is the contrast drawn by Woolf between the radically different forms or modes of colonial rule. The first of these was administrative colonialism, as in British India. Woolf sees this as based on a framing logic that was dehumanizing but not genocidal. It included the idea of the native as a dangerous but desirable asset, making profit for empire through cash cropping and other precarious forms and land use. Despite its many immiserating effects on indigenous people, this for Woolf was still very different from colonialism in its other conceptual mood, mass migration in settler colonialisms. The critical premise in this case was that of terra nullius. It defined Aboriginal people as lacking the capacity to understand land as an asset with use value, which determined for British colonizers who was and was not to be placed within the pale of productive humankind. Students, the result was unabashedly exterminatory, portraying indigenous Australian as a nullity to be expunged whether by direct violence or eugenicists. Child Zor aimed at the breeding out of non-white racial stock. Students, but rather than hating this as an exercise in right-minded deconstructive critique, there are critics who see the thinking behind many typologies of colonialism variants as in itself colonial. The defining of difference which replicates the colonizer's defining and thus silencing of the colonized subject, though the structural violence of naming power. Students, studies formed like wolves have thus been condemned as a backdoor whitewashing of empire, as adds with the mission of post-colonial criticism to expose and destabilize Eurocentric master narratives and discourses of domination through radical rethinking and reformulation of the forms of knowledge and social identities authored and authorized by colonialism and Western domination. Students, yet there are influential works in which the turning of an ethnographer's eye to the specificities of context have been applauded for providing in-depth accounts of colonial and post-colonial settings rather than broad brush accounts of the colonial and post-colonial as generic traits or qualities. Students, notable examples include treatments of colonial or formerly colonized sites as spaces of distinctive constructions of reality through the operations of myth, narrative, and other processes of imagination and embodied practice. Students, such work have greatly enriched the way in which culture itself is understood within and beyond anthropology, revealing the great breadth of its manifestations as experience and reference point in different political and social contexts. Students, so do studies of colonialism and post-colonialism have a future in a world now widely said to require the multi-dimensional framings provided by today's high-profile theorists of globalization and cosmopolitanism, one sign of the rich potential still offered by the colonialism, post-colonialism fields, tools, and perspectives is its elasticity, as in the ways its insights have been merged and synthesized those of other history-conscious areas of research and debate. This includes the work of scholars of socialism and post-socialism who have addressed the transformations and dramatic vernacularization of modernity in their own complex research contexts by reflecting productively on the ways in which key themes from the study of colonialism and post-colonialism can be engaged and expanded on. Okay students, see you in next class.